Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Impactful Conversations podcast with me, Dr. Glenn Wallis, and my very good friend and co-host, Nejmi Alexander. Nejmi, how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. I know we're both excited because we were just talking about this off air. We've got a fantastic guest joining us on this particular episode who, when we talk to a number of people outside of this episode, but both of us know independently, this person's name comes up repeatedly as somebody we should be talking to when it comes to building high-performing teams. So in that spirit, Rachael Howell, it's lovely to have you on, and thank you so much for being a guest on the Impactful Conversations podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. What a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, look, Rachael, you've got we'll maybe ask you just to give us a 30-second pencil sketch of your background, and then we're just going to dive straight into, your practical, and applied thoughts around building high-performing teams, because it seems to be such a key element in an organization's drive for high performance. And leaders themselves are often judged by their ability to build high-performing teams, right? So it'd be great to pick your brains, but give us and the listeners who don't know you yet, maybe a 30-second sketch of your background.
Yeah, so sort of 20 years odd in the world of HR. In various leadership positions, I've worked in typically big brands doing roles, mostly HR business partnering type roles, but actually have been really fortunate to spend some time leading culture and leading talent. And I've been based in the UK, but I've also had opportunities to work more globally. Throughout quite early in my career, really, I started leading teams probably before I was ready. If I'm really honest, I probably fell into it as many of us do. And then more latterly, I guess I've been very fortunate in that I've had some great learning experiences. And if I had to say what I'm proudest of in my career, it probably would be about kind of seeing potential in people, developing people, and leading high performing teams. So it's a subject that's very close to my heart.
You mentioned the opportunity, the reality of sort of falling into leadership, maybe before ahead of time. But as a result of that, being in, feet to the fire, getting loads of brilliant learning experiences. And I'd love to pick your brains, Rach, around in that background that you just shared, either in your personal or professional background that's kind of shaped you, your approach, your learning. What is it that's led you to be so effective at building high-performing teams?
So I'd say sort of personally, when I think of like my early years, I would say I've worked continuously since I was 15. I don't think I've ever really not had at least one job. So and I'm quite humble, sort of straightforward, humble sort of beginnings, and things like kindness and respect and fairness and working hard and taking accountability are sort of things that I've grown up with, really, that I think now are core values of mine that then I look to curate in a team and are really important to me. Um, I have a degree in psychology, so I've always been really interested in what motivates people. I love, reading people and really thinking about like what's the real question that's being asked or what's really on that person's mind. So I think that is really important in a high performing team when you're kind of trying to get the best out of people. I've worked in a lot of customer facing and commercial environments of all different scales and sizes. So when I think about, purpose, I really believe HR is there to be a strategic partner to drive, commercial value. And part of that is you've got engaged people, you've probably got more engaged customers, etc. So I think that those experiences I had when I was just doing different types of jobs to earn a bit of money have definitely then led me to be really curious about the value that you bring. I've had some brilliant leadership role models, and I'm very fortunate. And actually, what I'd say is I've had some brilliant leadership role models, and I've probably had some people who maybe didn't lead by example, but I've also learned things from them too, because sometimes you learn what not to do, or you reflect on your own experience and think about what you might do differently. And then I'd say when I was at Tesco for 4 years, and that was, and then Santander. I mean, I've been fortunate in the organisations I've worked with have had brilliant leadership, training offerings that I've been exposed to. And so that then has really helped. Although I do sort of think you can learn things in a classroom and that's great, but it's on the job. I think it's in the moment that you really kind of craft your leadership skills, if I'm honest. I'd sort of say they are probably the key ingredients as to how I've ended up where I've ended up, really, in terms of my approach to this.
Yeah, I love that. So values that feel, aligned to really driving, again, performance, interests in your psychology element, and then experiences, both good and bad,
Yeah,
that
for
have
sure.
to shape your thinking. And when you think about, so those are some of the ingredients that have led you to kind of having the impact in that you have around forming, shaping those teams. What ingredients do you look for, and what key elements do you focus on when you're building a high performance team?
Something I learned very early on is people like themselves, but don't just recruit, don't just surround yourself with people like you. I think the most high performing teams actually are a combination of skills and behaviors and experiences, and often you want the counter to you sometimes to really kind of help you look around the corners in a different way. So I think you need that diversity in all senses in a high performing team. You need to, I always think, recruit people who are very likely to have who have the potential to be better than me, and I think that's the job is bring people in, really dedicate energy to them to reach their potential and beyond, and be okay with the fact that there should be people in your team that know more than you, that are better at a lot of things than you are, and that's okay and that's right. So I think the composition of a team needs to be very blended, but also one that allows people to shine. And everyone's a bit of a leader, everyone is leading in their sort of areas of discipline and has the opportunity to shine. I do think you've got to treat people like individuals, the whole kind of, you've got two ears and one mouth, and that's, and so therefore listening. So I think listening is really important. And I think, without it sounding a bit cheesy, having fun and keeping it light where you can. A lot of organisations now, it's a tough agenda for lots of different reasons. And as a leader, I think, for a high performing team to be at its best, it knows when to dial things up and it knows when to dial things down. And you need to create that opportunity for people to, to connect with one another as individuals and have a bit of fun. I do think being clear on outcomes and value is important. I do think being really clear, part of the leader's gig in a high performing team is, you know, what does good look like, what needs to be true, equally what shouldn't be true, and ensuring everyone's aligned. I think alignment is really important in a high performing team. I'm quite blue as a person, so I think accountabilities are really important to be clarified. Your communication needs to be really clear. Um, and I think it's everyone being clear on the role that they're playing, but being flexible and adaptable enough that you chop and change that. And it's not me as the leader telling people what to do, it's collectively fit. But sometimes it is, sometimes you know when to call it and go, okay, but creating an environment where people feel able to say, actually, I think that's for me to lead now, I'll lead that. And I once had an analogy about a leader. You need to know when you're in the front and the middle and the back, and that's interchangeable. And I think I always sort of think about that, about, when is it strategic clarity? When is it you're part of the pack and someone else is stepping in? And when you're at the back quietly letting your team shine. And I try and sort of hold myself to account with that quite often, thinking about what space am I in this moment? What's my space? Where should I be?
Yeah,
Love that.
I love the angle that actually, when you were just describing that, Rach, I felt like there are a couple of things in what you just described that actually I think might be quite uncomfortable for people at times. That idea, the attraction of wanting to kind of form a team that is in your image, could be in trying to be averse to conflict, or
For sure.
the realities of, when there are different experiences,
Yeah.
different approaches, that could be uncomfortable for people. So people might shy away from it. It might feel more comfortable to form a team in your own likeness. I feel like there's some of the elements that you described around performance. Sometimes it might be, really outstanding leadership is about putting the team and the performance of the team over and above your own sort of personal, maybe hang-ups at times. Maybe that's unfair to describe it as such. But that really shone through for me there. You actually, like, the way in which you describe the components and the elements of what's important in a high-performing team does require you to being incredibly aware of self, and aware of how you're leading, aware of how you want to lead in the moment, and making decisions for the betterment of the team over and above, your own personal, how you might personally feel about that.
And you have to have an environment where you are okay with people telling you if you're not getting it right. You have to have a team that feels able to go, Rach, get out of the way. or I don't know that that is right. And but to your point, that takes vulnerability. And I think the definition of leadership has shifted. If I think when I first started out 500 years ago, it was a bit command and control and the leader was always right. And I think we have shifted now. I hope we've shifted. Whereas a leader, your measure of success is not about you are the person delivering everything and the face of everything. And, it's okay now as a leader, I think, to I take real pride in going into a meeting and saying, this isn't my work, this is my team's work. I love that. I love, because I think that, you're as good as your team. And I always think, but that's the measure of success for me. If my team are doing well, then I'm doing well. But I don't need to be the expert in everything. But I do think, to your point, that can feel uncomfortable sometimes for people, but you have to kind of sit in it a bit, I think. Depends what your priority is. What's your priority? Is it you? I think you have to be clear on what your priority is in all of this, don't you, as to what matters most.
And I listening to that lovely interaction between the two of you, I sort of had the luxury of sitting back a little bit, and I think the development stage of the leader as a person is really important in this, because if you're really, you're have high ego needs, so you need to be the center of attention. I think some of the things, as you said, Nejmi, could be really uncomfortable for you. And by the way, you're probably not going to be doing it very well either, because everybody else will be looking at you going, oh, here goes Glenn again. It's all about Glenn. But I really link that to your idea, Rach, about at times you need to be the person at the very back of the team, largely invisible, particularly I think at moments where the team's been successful, whether you've had a lot to do with it or not. That's the moment to sort of step back and let them shine. Conversely, when it's all gone horribly wrong, that's probably the time that you stand up and protect them.
For sure. Yeah.
So I think there are different roles at different times. The state of development of the leader in the sort of psychological sense development,
I think that's right.
is really key. Another question has arisen out of that, which I think will then lead us on to the next part of the conversation generally, which is, do you think all teams can be developed to become high performing? So it's not quite a nature nurture question, but bearing in mind all the elements that you've just talked about that need to be in place for a team to be high performing, can you build all of those? Yeah, so therefore every team has at least the potential to be high performing?
If a team is a collection of individuals, and you have to believe every individual's got potential to be achieved, I like to think so. I do think, like I say, the culture and environment has a role to play in it. It's all very well going, as a team, it's okay to fail and it's okay to course correct. But if you're in an environment where that is not celebrated, or you don't feel safe to do that. So I think in isolation, all teams, I think, have the potential to be high performing if all the critical success factors are in place and true. I do think, again, I think a leader makes or breaks a team. So often it's if you've got the right leader at the top. I think sometimes it's the combination of things. I have seen people not be successful in one team, for example, then move to another team and really thrived. And sometimes it's the role, and sometimes it's the mission. I have friends who have been to organisations and really just not got on, but then gone somewhere else and really thrived. So I do think the environment has a role to play, but I think you have to assume, I think, as a leader, you have to believe you have to believe your team is going to be high performing. A leader should never go in, I don't think, into a team situation and just think my team's just average, or we're never going to do. You've got to believe your team can be high performing, and then you've got to work, and then you've got all the things around strategic clarity and vision and work with people as individuals. But there is something about some people thrive in certain teams and not others. And really, that's okay. I just think that's okay.
I think what I really love, and I would, if you didn't quite catch what Rachel just said when you were listening to the podcast, I suggest you rewind the last 90 seconds, because for me, I absolutely love the idea that as a leader, you should at least go in with the idea or the aspiration that the team can, and go, because at least you've probably got more chance of succeeding with that mindset than just assuming this team. How many times have we heard about sales teams that were at the bottom of the league and then somebody new comes in and then they're at the number, it happens. But I think it happens because partly that leader's gone in with a mindset that they can make that shift.
But so you have to be realistic about where you are. I think you have to believe that, and then you have to be able to say, but where are we and where do we want to be, and be clear on that. And then what's it going to take? And you have to really commit, because it's quite, I've also seen leaders say my team's high performing when they're not, and that's quite dangerous, for the people involved and for them. So you have to believe it, and then you have to commit to it, and you have to really think about, but what are the steps that I'm going to take, I need my team to take to really get there. And some of that's hard because some of that means you have to lean in and change some stuff up and have some really honest conversations with people. But I do think you've got to acknowledge like that, like where are you
Yeah,
today in order to
yeah,
get there, and
that's
then
a really good
commit.
point. Okay, so that's a really nice place for us to explore this term high performing team. You've led lots of high performing teams. How do you know that they are? How do you? I know. I
Yeah.
absolutely expect that part of your answer will be, by the way, it's a never ending. So performance leads to higher performance, which leads to higher performance. But how do you know that they're actually? How do we define a team as high performing in your experience?
Yeah, it's a funny one because I thought about how do you know, and I thought, well, actually, I think you know because they can sustain high performance without you. You can get out the way, and they can absolutely keep doing all the things right. You know, communicating, collaborating, driving the outcomes, looking after each other consistently without me. And it's you sort of and to your point, high performance never really ends, does it? You're always striving for the next best thing. But I really think, when I think of the teams I've been proudest of, I can absolutely get out the way and they can keep going just as brilliantly without me. The bit they miss then is the coaching and what you bring personally. And I think that for me, I think that's when your team's really high performing. I also think I once had I worked for an MD, I think it was at Tesco, and he said to me, I know you're doing a good job, Rach, because people keep telling me that you're giving them a bit of a hard time and that and I think there's something around high performance isn't always indicated by everybody raving about the team and going, what, sometimes it is because they're agitating and sometimes it's because they're looking around the corners and speaking up about the thing that people don't want to hear. And so I think the how you measure high performance, there's obvious things, isn't there, like the metrics and measures, but there's also something about some of the most high performing teams I've been in are the people that are the bravest people that speak up and say the thing that people don't want to hear. So there might be moments where people go, oh, I'm not sure, but it's in spirit of being high performing, if you see what I mean. So I think you have to, as a leader, sometimes think it's not always. I think there's a difference between being liked and being respected. Some of the most high performing individuals I've come across are really credible and really respected, but not necessarily liked, but in the spirit of, because they're not saying what everybody wants to hear all the time. Do you know what I mean? So I think the definition of high performance and how you recognize it is important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I took from that it's both the what and the how.
For sure.
It's very much,
Yeah.
there are the commercial measures that would
Yeah.
suggest that you're contributing to the overall success of the organization, but there's also the how that is being done.
Yeah. The
Is
how is the
really,
defining thing for me of a high performing team. And this is what I think when I was in banking, I think this was what changed is, at one point it was all about sales and it was all about league tables. And then there was a shift, rightly so, and it became much more about service and value and how people showed up. And I think what really makes a high performing team is the how, I think, is the
Yeah.
how results are delivered, how they show up together, how they support one another, how they think, how they're curious. That for me is what makes a high performing team. Over and the what for me is like it's like hygiene, like you get it right and you should get it right. It's a bit of but the how is what distinguishes a high performing team for me, for sure.
I'm really interested in this. Like the how that you're describing for me is like the behavior. What are the behaviors that are observable, that are exhibited in when
Yeah.
a team is high performing, and a number of things that you called out there, Rach, which are really fascinating, right? Like they're self-sustaining, so there's accountability and commitment to really, and again, agitating to get things right and challenge and like push the envelope or the status quo around what we're here to do or we how we're going about what we intend to do, and they're courageous too.
Yeah.
Then courage in that we're demonstrating here in terms of behaviors of a high performing team. Is there anything else that you feel is like this is a real indicator? So if for any of our listeners who are thinking, I think my team's high performing, or I really want my team to be high performing, what should I be focusing on to kind of embed as a
Yeah.
being within the team? What should I be looking for or trying to encourage?
Yeah.
What else do you feel
I think
is present?
I think caring, like genuinely that authenticity of caring about one another. Recently I had a really high performing team, and it was because they would get, to help it, they would step out of their lanes. They would see that something needed doing. They would deviate from what their job was, if you like, and they would swarm around things in service of getting the right outcomes to help one another. And I think that's a really high performing team for me that can pivot and can support each other like that. So I do think there's something in sort of caring and that sort of ability to adapt and flex to where the biggest priority is. And there's an ego point in that around accepting someone else's priorities might be bigger than your own. And actually that's what it's the whole them versus I thing. And that's important, I think. And I do think it's feedback's a funny word, isn't it? Feedback's like a bit like networking, isn't it? You sort of say the word feedback and everybody sort of feels a bit sick.
Yeah.
It all becomes a bit difficult, but I do think there's something about being able to have those good open conversations with each other around what's working and not what's not working. And I don't know that is a big scripted thing, actually. I think that's more about in the moment, be honest. I really like that idea, but I'm not sure about that. And having that kind of adult to adult ability, and it's not personal. Like the good teams are the ones that can have the debate and they can check and challenge each other and they can pick up on things and all that good stuff. And it's not personal, they have that respect for each other and they can have that debate and discussion. And then after that, have a chat about their weekends and how everyone's doing, and that's okay. And I do think often that bit is what gets in the way of people a bit too much, this sort of inability to talk openly to each other. And there's a humility attached to that, I think, as well, accepting again, your idea might not be the right one, and that's okay. So I think they are the teams, I think, and growth might people who want to learn and people who, go like, I love it when I learn from my team all the time. I mean, my team were laughing the other day because I went to a seminar about AI and I was sort of relaying it to them, and I was sort of almost, and someone in my team knows a lot more about this than me. And I was saying, how did I do? And she was like, you're okay. And then she knew that. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I never thought I was the expert. But that growth mindset and then sort of sharing that knowledge with each other and learning from each other, I think, is also key.
Yeah.
It's that, none of us are the only expert in the room. So let's all learn. And I think, again, that's high performance for me, when you really want to learn from one another.
Can I just build on something that you both brought up there, which is the theme that I'm getting from what you said, Rachel, is I've got to be a little bit careful here because this is a bias of mine. So challenge me on it if just because I've said it, it clearly doesn't make it true. There's a real sense from what you're saying that building a high performing team is a proactive process. You don't just become high performing because you say you are, and you don't just become high performing because you want to be high performing. It is a daily effort. It's a daily study. It's area of focus. So what I'd love to hear and share with the audience is you've been in super busy roles. You're in a super busy role at the moment. How do you avoid the trap that lots of leaders fall into? And I only know this because I've coached loads of them, where they get so sucked into the day to day, and maybe it's the area that they have a particular expertise in or a reputation for.
Yeah.
And yet you've managed to stay above that and still focus on the team. How do you manage that tension?
No, I didn't always get this right, though. I know people I've worked for before, certainly, I think I've learned it. You have to be really intentional about it, and you have to treat it, like as a task, in terms of you have to prioritize time for it. Um, and I think you have to find what works for you. Some people it works going and learning things and going, and for some people it's more about observing other people in the job and figuring, but wherever it is, you have to be intentional about the fact that leadership is a muscle that you've got to develop and feed, but you do it in a way that means something to you. I've had it before where people said, go and see this person and there'll be a great coach or someone for you, and I've sat and think, I don't get it, this is not for me. So you have to be intentional about it, and you have to prioritize it, but then you have to find the right mechanisms that work for you. And I think it's important you do it because it sends a signal to your team about it being important. If you're not going to invest in your own development, then why on earth are your team going to prioritize it in their busy calendars either? So I think you have to make it something that is important, and as important as other things. But also, there are moments every day where you can learn things from other people if you're looking hard enough. You've being curious and observing, like situationally sensing what's around you. Some of my best learnings around leadership are just watching other people in action. It's no more complicated than that. You can just be in a meeting and think that person's managing that conversation really well. What is it they're doing? So it doesn't always have to be big grand things, but you have to, like I said, I learned when I first started leading people, sort of fell into it, and I hadn't really appreciated that it's something you grow and you develop and you invest in. Certainly more recent years, I really have got hold of that so I do think you have to be intentional about it. Some people are, and we're all different, aren't we? We've all got things about ourselves innately that you think, I'm good at certain things. Like other people think, God, I wish I could be more like them. But I don't think it's something you just have. I do think you have to feed it and build it, and to stay relevant as well, because the workforce is so diverse now that when you think about leading teams, you can have so many. If you think the external world, and we've been through COVID and everything that's going on, and then you look at your team and it's multi-generational, and so you've also got to stay relevant. There's your core leadership, but you've got to think about, what do my team need from me? And I think that's changed massively in the last few years. So
Yeah.
what served you well in the past may not serve you well now. And so you've got to keep thinking about, because I do think people choose leaders. I always think, like when you do interviews and stuff, you think, yeah, but they're choosing me. As much as you can have this perception of, well, you're lucky, it's a job and you're applying for a job and we'll assess you. And I do think, to build a high performing team, people have got to want to work with you and with that team. So
Mm.
you've got to there's got to be something about you that people go, I want to work with that person. I'm
Yeah.
excited about that.
Yeah.
And often, and the last thing I'd say is, it's realizing the commercial benefit is, particularly these busy environments, it's helping people make the connection between good leadership and commercial outcomes. It's easy, all of us can quote different things, but when leaders grasp it, I do think often that unlocks something in them when they realize, you're saying you've got no time, but you've got no time probably because maybe you're not delegating. And why you're not
Yeah.
delegating, well, if you can unpack it with them,
Yeah.
they can start to go, oh, okay, I see that by doing this I unlock something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of times over 25 years of doing this work that you go into an organization and the leaders and managers, whatever level in the organization you're working with, they're usually working, massive generalization alert, by the way, at least one level below where
Yes.
they actually are in the organization, because they're getting sucked into the weeds of the day to day, and they're being very reactive. And I'm not saying
Yes.
you should never do that. Of course, when you have to. But I think being there by default, and not spending the time on building the team. We talk about the difference. Nejmi and I have had a couple of conversations already about this on the podcast. There's a difference between doing the work of the team and doing the work on the team. And I think that distinction is really important for leaders who are leading they want to be leading high performing teams.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. You
Yeah.
have to fly. Someone said to me, you've got to fly at the right altitude.
Yeah.
And I think people become high performing because they feel uncomfortable. They need to be. I think you learn and as a leader, you're not helping them if you remove the uncomfortable situation from them all the time. But you do need to create a safe environment where they can enter into said uncomfortable situation, whether that be a difficult conversation or a challenging meeting, knowing that you've got their back. I really believe in creating that environment where people know that I will always have their back. Now, we might behind the scenes have a chat and go, what are you doing? But I will always have, and I'm very clear on that with my team around, I will always have your back, but I won't do your work. You go, you've got this, you go. And actually, I learned this because I remember being somewhere once and one of my team had to go and have a really tricky conversation. We were unionised. It was really tough. And she really wanted to do it. And I could see she was really nervous. And in the end, I said, look, do you want me to come with you? And I said, I won't do it for you, but do you want me to just be in the room? I'll sit at the back. And I did. And she did so brilliantly. She did so brilliantly. And she said afterwards, I'm so glad you didn't, because if you'd have offered to do it, I would have said, do it. I'd have just said, take it. But doing it was really important to her, and she was really pleased she did. And she's right, I probably would. I could imagine, I could probably to hold myself back from going, just let me do it. And I just always I always think about that. I think, don't do it for them, but just create an environment where they feel safe to do it themselves, but know when to step in. If then it really can't be done, that's the leader's job then to go, right, let me help you now.
Yeah. But brilliant reflections. There's so much in what was said.
I think we might need to have you back, Rachel, for a part two.
I'd love to come back, I'd love to come back. Yeah.
I always think of like discomfort as actually being a really positive signal that you're in a space where there's challenge, there's opportunity to learn, to grow. Yes, the reason why it's uncomfortable is probably it's newness and you might make a mistake.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
exactly as you described, if the environment feels right, if you feel invited and permitted to, try, experiment, learn, maybe get it wrong, ideally get it right, then that's where growth can happen. And I but there was such a big call to action there, Rach, in what you're describing, that actually, as the leader, not only do you need to be the role model around development, but you need to be uncomfortable yourself. You need to be challenging and agitating for that to happen, because then you're setting the conditions, you're demonstrating that's important. And that's, a characteristic of the team that you expect, and that in so doing that's going to help elevate the levels that the team is capable of getting to.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Look, I genuinely think we should try and find some space in your incredibly busy diary.
I'd love to.
Because
I'd love to.
there's so much more that I think we would love to get your insights in, like, you know, attracting talent, building talent, those sorts of topics. I think we haven't had a time to touch on today, but
Yeah, that'd be great.
But having said that, I mean, my head's just gone because I think I knew quite a lot about this, but I know a lot about it from from the kind of work that we do. But it's lovely to get literally sort of lift the top off your head and sort of suck all that experience out. And I hope that listeners have found it as powerful as I certainly have. I think it's been brilliant, really fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time, but also the generosity of just being willing to share.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. It's been a lovely Friday afternoon. Thank you ever so much.
Brilliant. Well, look, until the next time, this is Dr. Glenn Wallis and Nejmi Alexander saying, it's Impactful Conversations is the name of the podcast for a reason, which is Rachael has shared so much powerful stuff there. Go away, try stuff. Go away and experiment with some things as leaders of teams. You've got the power to at least have a mindset approach that says this team can be high performing, and you've got lots of information there to go away and experiment with. And we would love to hear about your successes or challenges, but connect with us and we'd love to hear about it. Until next time, everybody. Rachael, thank you ever so much. Nejmi, cheers, mate. Speak to you soon. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.